This is Identity at the Center.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad yourself?
Good. I'm really good. Excited about today's episode and excited. This is kind of a transition into the EIC conference because we're going to talk to a friend who we will see there, get to spend time with him and his colleagues, and hear his story a little bit more today.
Yeah, it's an exciting one. We got a sponsor spotlight with Elimity today, and so we're going to be talking with Maarten in a second. But this is a little bit different because we actually threw axes with them last year in Berlin. We had a great time, and they had, they put on a great event that we went to and had a good time with it. So one of those rare times where it's like, yeah, we have thrown bladed things at walls together. Does that make sense, Jim?
Yeah. Oh yeah, we've definitely delved into playing with weapons together.
I like that,
Jeff,
playing with weapons. And
the thing that I think I gave you a shout out on this last year was you are surprisingly good at throwing axes.
Well, I'm an athlete. What can I say? May not look like one, but I guess I had the body of an axe thrower. I don't know if that's a confident or not.
You still have the caveman instinct somewhere within your DNA.
Which is ironic considering I don't really like to go outside. So maybe a cave with AC and Wi-Fi I would be most comfortable in.
Exactly.
All right. So today we do have a sponsored episode. It is with Elimity, and you can find them on the web at elimity.com/IDAC. So we'll have that link in our show notes as well as kind of everywhere we kind of post this out. But let me go ahead and introduce Maarten Decat. He is the co-founder and CEO of Elimity and also an excellent axe thrower. Welcome to the show, Maarten.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to seeing you here in about a month or so when we hit Berlin for EIC. But let's talk a little bit about your background in identity. How did you get into the world of identity and access management? Is it something that you chose or did it choose you?
It's a good question. I would say it chose me. So to give a bit of my background, I'm an engineer by education. Belgian University, did a master in computer science and then a PhD on access control. So spent a couple of years working on policy-based access control, if you will. So made some scalable engines for XACML, if that rings a bell, or the OPA engine these days. But it was at a very entrepreneurial university here in Belgium, so I was continuously challenged to build a venture out of my research. And in that process, we really saw, policy-based access control is nice. The applications are maybe quite narrow, but the main challenge that all IAM practitioners were just complaining about and just literally saying, oh man, it's basic understanding of who can do what within their company. And so eventually we started Elimity on that premise.
So that problem of trying to make sure that you've got the right access in place, tell me a little more about kind of the Elimity origin story and, what were some of the other problems maybe you're looking to solve, or is it pretty much focused on that?
Well, it really started with that. So our first customers were really big enterprises, also in the banking sector. So these are companies of 30,000, 40,000 employees. They had an IGA. They have a very extensive IGA deployment. They had a privileged identity, so a PAM solution. They had SIAM. They had all these components in practice, and still you have all of these IAM practitioners. So some of these companies had 70 people in the core IAM team, and then all of these role owners, application owners, team leaders that are just asking for, okay, but now who is connected to these entitlements, to these technical roles, to these business roles? And the solution back then was, the things that we've seen is just insane Excel macros on data put in a SharePoint every day and all of that. And so we started providing them a better solution. Started them providing with a better alternative, so identity analytics. And then gradually you saw that this evolved into what I like to call provable control. So it wasn't just on top of an IGA anymore, but really any application, bringing that together, answering the question, hey, across all of my applications in SharePoint databases, Active Directory, Enter ID, the cloud, on-premise, who can do what? Where are there risks? You can run security controls, remove those risks, run your access review. So really everything that you need to show that you're on top of things. That's how things evolved from really that identity analytics part to what we now call identity visibility and intelligence.
Yeah, I think we're probably going to get a lot into IVIP or IVIP. I'm not sure quite how we're pronouncing it at this point, but let me ask you about the name of the company, Elimity. How did you come up with that? And tell me the background of that itself.
I get asked this question so many times, and I wish I had a cool story to share here. But to be honest, we're just a couple of engineers. We wanted a name that could be pronounced and for which the .com was still available. So we just used one of those domain name generators that said, yeah, the .com, the .net, the .be is all available. And eventually, based on some words that have association with IAM, we landed on Elimity. We kind of like it. Yeah.
I'm going to pick up on what Jeff was talking about. So this IVIP or IVIP, you tell us which one is kind of the right catchphrase. What does this stand for? And what are kind of the core components of IVIP?
IVIP, and by the way, I also don't know how to pronounce it, but I pronounce it as IVIP. It's an acronym coined by Gartner, I think summer of last year, and it's really identity, visibility, and intelligence platforms. So I would summarize it as it's the more recent evolution in the IAM space, and the core variation, if you will, is really a laser focus on visibility, not automation. So you look at identity and access management as a data problem and not as an automation problem. And that means that the core components are that you really should look for including all relevant IAM data. So users, permissions, roles, relationships, activity, configuration, all of that from all of the critical applications of an organization. Put that into one big identity data graph is typically the data model that you see that IVIP players use. So it's fundamentally more detailed than just a flat list of entitlements that you see in many IGAs. And then you put easy analytics on top of that. And then the core value of that is a rapid integration, very fast, very short time to value. And the value is really that visibility, removing risks, understanding who can do what, and then do something with that.
Yeah, I think you've kind of laid out why it's important, but something has happened in the last few years that has now made IVIP, it's on the tip of everyone's tongue. Everybody wants to know about it. IAM's been around for 20 years, right? Why is it that now this topic has become hot?
Yeah, I would really say so. We've been at the center of that whole evolution, and the thing that has changed in the last 5 years, I would say, is that security really has become a much stronger driver for identity and access management. So these days, with identity first security and all of those movements, we all know that you can't neglect the role of IAM anymore in the security landscape. With cloud and SaaS and all of that, identity is just such a big part of the attack surface of an enterprise. So you have to take control of this part. And no CISO wants to be that CISO that was hacked because of stolen credentials of someone who left 2 years ago. And so you really see that if you think about actual risk in your enterprise, then user access risk, so identity-related risk, is a part that you cannot neglect anymore. And on top of that, you see that regulations are really driving this forward even harder. And just to name a few, SOC 2, ISO 27001 are required more and more in the industry for actually doing business. And they all mention things like access control and user access. And you have things like CCPA in the US, NIS2 and DORA in the EU, NCA in the Middle East. So they all force companies to take control of all aspects of cybersecurity. And that means, amongst other things, knowing and controlling who can do what. And in my experience, you see that very strongly because we started in the financial sector, always highly regulated, always very security aware. But now these days, we have customers in insurance, manufacturing, SaaS companies, healthcare, all of those sectors. And that's just because cybersecurity is a need for any sector, any company of decent size in any sector these days.
You mentioned the large financial institutions, and my experience with large financial institutions is they're usually solving problems before product spaces develop and replace their way of solving these problems. So was that the case with IVIP where organizations already kind of coming up with solutions, and what were they doing before IVIP became a product space?
Yeah, the things that I've seen people do in practice, you wouldn't believe. Yeah, probably you have the same experience, but just to name a few of the things that our first customers were doing. So, for example, a very mature company, very extensive IGA deployment, and then the same use case that you see in many of these very large financial institutions. You have all these people like role owners, application owners, experts helping the business with access reviews and all of that, and they were all asking information about IGA data, tell me who is linked to the entitlements in my application, to which role, and so on. And really the plumbing I've seen in companies in practice. Just the example that I said before, a huge Excel sheet put on SharePoint with a daily cron job. And then all of these people building macros on top of that so that they can get the information that is relevant for them specifically. It's just insane. Other companies, you always have some poor sysadmin that is tasked with writing PowerShell scripts that have to run every day or even manually every month and then combine it with other reports. So clearly, please all stop doing that. It's not sustainable. And then some of the better approaches that I have seen is also with the very large enterprises is some of these actually build specific data lakes specifically for identity and access management. And that clearly is a very good approach, but I've only seen it being done in the very large, the largest of large security teams and IAM teams out there. So probably only doable for the top 0.1%. And IVIP really is. So those really are platforms that wrap that in an off-the-shelf product offering. So you don't have to think about building your own Azure data lake or whatever technology you prefer yourself anymore.
That was a great answer, because I think the keys that jumped out at me is it's very bespoke solutions. People building their own, we're building their own solutions and then having to operationalize it. And I think as somebody who's been in identity for over 20 years and in IT for over 25 years, the first thing I think about whenever we're putting together a bespoke solution, sometimes those are what's necessary, is how are we going to operationalize this? If it comes back to cron jobs, if it comes back to individuals updating things, I say that's not sustainable. So great answer on that. I want to bring up kind of what I think the doubters will say. And I'm skeptical of the doubters, honestly, because with a lot of what you've already covered, I think this is outside of anything that currently exists. But I think the doubter perspective is like, hey, we have IGA. Can't IGA do all these things already? Aren't these kind of core capabilities of IGA? What do you say to that?
Well, that I understand the doubt, the question. I get it. And especially in the early days, we were compared to IGAs a lot. And I can really understand that if you invest that amount of effort and that amount of money into a project and the deployment of the typical sizes that you see, then you expect these platforms to provide some insights into who can do what as well, of course. And so in practice, you see all these platforms as good as they can be. I really like and I adore what they do, but they're not analytical platforms, and their analytical capabilities are pretty limited. And that's why one of the first things that we were pulled towards is deploying this on top of an IGA. But in practice, especially now, these days, you see that it has become a completely different beast. It's not just an analytical component put on top of an IGA, but it's really, if you're looking for security value, if you want to have insights in who can do what in any application that is interesting or that is relevant in your application, in your organization, then you want that to be fast. The different value it's about time towards visibility, time towards understanding. To have that understanding, you also, from a technological point of view, I'm a technology guy myself. You need a different data type, in my opinion. It's not just a flat list of entitlements. That's why all of the IVIP players or IVIP players that I know, they all work with this concept of a data graph, an identity data graph. And then you link stuff like Active Directory, an IGA, Enter ID, file share, SharePoint, database systems, local admins, workforce identities, non-human identities, all of that. Those are all things that you want to bring into one big overview so you can apply controls on that. And that has grown into something completely different than what an IGA provides.
So can we tease out a little bit more about, when we talk about graph databases and, where IGA is typically been looked at in the past, at least, and probably still today, is like, okay, here is who has access to what. How is an IVIP solution better or more additive to what I'm getting out of an IGA? You mentioned graph databases. Why is that data construct better than just, well, here's Jim and here's the account he has and here's the permissions assigned to that account? What does that enable, having more intelligence around that?
Deeper depth and a wider breadth, I would say. So and again, it's a different type of problem that we're solving. To be clear, I'm not dissing on an IJ at all. The problem that they solve is you want a two-way communication. You also want to provision. You want to synchronize over time. And in that sense, in that case, I would also choose a simpler data model that just makes it easier to provision back to AD, to provision back to target applications, and that data model makes sense there. But if you're asking, like many of our customers these days, SharePoint is a critical application in many organizations. That's because of the Copilot deployments. If we're going to run Copilot with some kind of credential, then let's make sure we understand what that credential can access, that type of thing. That question just by itself, it's Active Directory to Enter ID to SharePoint with groups, with SharePoint roles, with access to specific files, to specific sites, and all of that. And that amount of complexity, that amount of detail that you need to answer that, to give those insights, it's just different than a flat list of entitlements. And so, in that sense, more detail, the ability to ingest a lot more different authorization types, because you can tweak the data model more in the platform, in the IVIP platform, and all of that just leads to a vastly faster deployment time. That's what it ends up with.
So it sounds like there's definitely overlap, right, between like what an IVIP would tell you and what a standard IGA solution would tell you. I think you mentioned running that you've seen this, right? You run IVIP sort of on top of the rest of your IAM infrastructure, which would include IGA. How do you make the decision to make sure that you've got, you're not competing or duplicating efforts where you can? Are there things that are like out of scope for an IVIP that people should be aware of?
Yeah, definitely. Maybe we should do an IVIP project owner session specifically on this question, but at least my view is the clear answer: automated provisioning. That's for me. That's clearly out of scope for our product. And I mean, automated remediation, maybe. So writing back to the systems for which we get information, for which we ingest information. Yeah, makes sense if you're running controls on top of that information. If you see potentially orphaned accounts, if you want to update metadata, if you want to revoke a role or a group in Active Directory or whatever source that we import, and it makes sense that you can click a button and it's actually fixed in the source system. But anything that goes beyond that, like full workflow engines with role models on top of that, synchronization jobs and so on, no, I'm really not gonna repeat all of what has been built in the sale points and the one identities and the Omada of the world. They're much better in that part. They're great at what they do. The focus of an IVIP is really visibility, in getting data in there as fast as we can, providing analytical capabilities, building intelligence on top of that. That's just completely different than a provisioning engine.
So it seems to me like a wise or maybe a scalable way to do this would be deploy an IVIP and then let that collect all the information and then rely on your orchestration components, right? IGA, PAM, whatever it may be, to then do the interactions with those different systems, right? Joiner, mover, leaver, remediation, et cetera. But let IVIP sort of be the brain that says, here's all the information. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I think it definitely is. Yeah, and it's actually it's a combination that we're seeing more and more with our customers. So it depends a bit on where you start. But if I'm talking about those organizations that come at this problem from a security angle, the CISO says, yeah, we have to take control over user access as well, and they don't have an IGA yet. Then it makes sense to integrate all of the sources that I said before for the first time, typically, and then look at where there are risks, remove those things, and really see this as a preparation for an IGA deployment, maybe. And then you see that this is used for the control, the insights, the governance in the breadth, the whole landscape of IT applications that a company has. And then some of these choose to evolve this into a full IGA deployment, completely fair. And others choose, yeah, we're going to do the provisioning just for a selective core amount of core applications with maybe something like an Enter-ID or a lightweight provisioning engine, and then combine those two in that way. So there are many variations, but the core right now is that you've pulled apart these things into separate products that you can deploy the one before the other. And in any order that you want to do that, it completely makes sense. In any combination that you want to do that, all fine.
So we've got now like this IVIP system that has all this data in it. We're collecting data from where? Is it from systems? Is it from cloud? Is it sort of like everything? Do I connect like an HR platform with like people data coming in? Like, how does that work?
Well, honestly, all of the above. So we haven't seen one single customer that is the same as another one, but there is some commonality, of course. So if there is an IGA, then definitely that is one of the first things, because it contains a treasure trove of information already. You don't want to repeat all the connectors that have already been made, so we take that up. If there's a PAM, a bit the same. And then it really depends on where the customer wants to go. So we always ask, hey, tell us your top 5, top 10, top 20 amount of systems from the perspective of it contains information about who can access what. So 9 out of 10, that starts with Active Directory and Entra ID. And then it kind of depends which kinds of infrastructure are critical to their business. So some of these run applications themselves, then access to the admin database, the servers, the cloud infrastructure, all of that. Others do development themselves, so GitHub, GitLab, Azure DevOps, all of that. Some run OT environments where you want to have access to machines, to production lines, and all of that. Whatever is important, that's what you want to get in there. And the HR system makes a lot of sense, especially for the workforce identity, because the data model that we advocate is really put the workforce, so the employee central from the HR system, and link all of the accounts of the different systems back to the employee as good and as well as you can to have that identity data graph that answers who can access what right now. And then, of course, for other types of identities, the non-human, maybe the agentic identities in the future, that's different type of identities that also fit in that same broad data model.
So I was going to ask you about how this extends to non-human identities, workload identities, whatever we want to call the non-people part of it. But I think you kind of answered that. So let me ask you another question, because I was thinking of this use case, and I'm sure Jim was kind of thinking the same thing. Is this seems like this would be really handy in a situation where I have like a merger or an acquisition. Because what I typically see is like, okay, let's say we're buying a company, right? We're acquiring something. You take over, their instances of all their stuff. And then maybe at some point you figure out how you want to consolidate infrastructure. Maybe it happens, maybe it never happens. But it seems to me like there's a very good use case here as well. If I have an IVIP that can see both organizations, see all the identities, human and non-human across both, now I've got sort of a control plane at the top that tells me who has access to what for both of the organizations. Is that fair?
It's completely fair. It's actually a use case that we see a lot, and also other variations of those use cases. So you have the use case that you just said, where a company is acquiring another company and you want to have rapid insights in that, and then maybe clean up and prepare the integration of the two systems, the two infrastructures, and definitely. But then at the same time, you also have a similar use case in very big multinational companies where the central, the headquarters, HQ, says, yeah, we want to control what the people in the US and in Sweden are doing maybe, but we can't really force them to work in the same way because they've always been a bit independent. But at least we should trust but verify, So we're not going to force them to use the same IGA system, the same onboarding flows and all of that. But at least from a security perspective, from a governance perspective, from an IAM perspective, you want to know, are there no identities that should be removed? Do they actually do their lever process correctly? Who exactly has admin privileges? At least from HQ perspective, you want to know that. You want to have that control without maybe putting too much barriers in the way that they work. And it's all variations of those use cases that drive IVIP.
Another use case that's coming to mind, I was just thinking about EIC last year, and Maarten Decat talked about the identity fabric. I just feel like IVIP would play a tremendously useful role in this identity fabric concept. Have you guys thought about that at all?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, so it's very similar and plays a very big role in the vision behind identity fabric, because the whole idea there is that there's this control plane, like Jeff said, that is on top of all the identity components that you might have, all the repositories, all the systems that are involved there, and you see signals from one system trigger actions in another, and this really becomes a living thing. And all of that starts with visibility. And it's really very similar to a couple of weeks ago, I was at Gartner IM in London, and there Nathan Harris, one of the analysts of Gartner, one of the guys behind IVIP, talked about where or why they see this as a separate new thing. And he talked about visibility, intelligence, and actions, that you build your actions on intelligence and intelligence on visibility. And that's exactly the same in that concept. You want to build your actions, your active components, on top of something intelligent, and that has to have visibility on all the needed data. So yeah, very, very clearly related vision there.
Yeah, I'm really glad you laid out that last part with the stack of visibility, intelligence, and actions, because I think when I talk to identity leaders, so, I mean, I hear this. It's like, let's cut right to the actions. And it's like, well, if you take action and you don't have the right information, or you have a limited scope of visibility, then you're, not starting from the right place. Visibility is very important, and then you can build intelligence on top of the visibility. At the same time, I'm also hearing from you that there can be specific use cases that you don't have to wait until you have full visibility to start getting some value out of it. And that starts leading me to think about, how organizations typically go about IVIP, right? Because everybody wants to start and get that, either that low-hanging fruit, or they want to show value quickly. And I'm wondering, what is the typical scope and size of the IVIP deployment when people are wanting to test it and get value out of it? Is there typical, or is each one like a snowflake?
It's pretty unique every time because no organization is the same. But the concept behind every deployment of Elimity is always that we first ask the manager, the CISO, the IM owner in charge, hey, dear manager, what are the most critical applications or systems in your organization? It really depends on the business that they do, on the architecture that they have. And one of the strengths of Elimity is really that the platform is specifically built to quickly incorporate just any application with a very extensive data model or extensible data model. And then you work in iterations, but the first iteration, the top 5, let's say, is pretty similar. I mentioned them before. It's Active Directory, ID, and IGA, a PAM and HR system. And then you grow really into those maybe more specific areas of the organization, like databases, development environments, cloud environments, file environments or data environments, like a SharePoint, like file shares, OT environments, and all of that. And you bring everything there together. And then the first goal is really to have that visibility for the core security team. And often, well, in my opinion, one of the coolest parts or moments in any deployment of Elimity Insights is the first time that we get to demonstrate our platform with their data integrated. The first time that these people see that in the platform often is also the first time that they just see this data integrated in any case, and they immediately know, hey, but look at this guy Maarten or Jim, and look at his accounts. See, I knew that this guy shouldn't be there anymore. He's left 2 years ago, and I knew he wasn't removed. And can you look? Oh man, still admin rights in that cloud environment. I know it, and now they can make it tangible, quantifiable, and those are the most fun parts of any deployment. The moment that it starts taking a life of its own, that you see that these people get these insights, they can start working on that. They can ask their manager, hey, see, this is the things that we have to fix. That's when you really see this deployment start living. Yeah.
That sounds like an exciting moment when you can show somebody like, hey, in the first 5 minutes, we added some value, right? We identified some heavy duty accounts that shouldn't be. I'm just wondering, like, whenever I hear integration, whenever I hear connecting systems, I think of, oh, that could be a bread box, or that could be a wheat field. So what is it? How do you connect systems, and how big of an effort usually is it?
In many different ways. So for us, one of the key things in our engineering, one of the key values that the product really provides is the fact that it minimizes this effort to integrate applications. And that means that, like any of the IVIP players out there, we have this out-of-the-box library, a library of out-of-the-box connectors where it's just configuration to import. data like from Enter ID. It's just a credential and an enterprise application, and that's it. But the coolest, the most important applications are mostly not not out of the box. And so there, yeah, all the variations and the things that we've done in practice is we always try to think along with the customer, whatever is the reason or the manner, the approach that works best for them. And for some cases, is it a SaaS application? Then through a scheme API, hopefully, we see that standard growing in the market. It's definitely something that we see more and more. Has the downside most of the times that the scheme API doesn't really provide all the details that you would want from it. So then the question becomes, should we do something more dedicated if we don't have that connector yet? If it's an on-premise application, is there a database? Is there maybe an export functionality? In the worst cases, the craziest things that we've done, and this by far is the common case. It's not something that we want to do too much, but it's even robot process automation, so RPA on top of browsers and so on. If it's really critical and you want to automate it, and then variations with CSV files sometimes and all of that. But that's where you want to stay away from. You really want to go for the automated import, and then you look at APIs, database integrations, and all of that. And the cool thing about the idea of is just collecting data is we ask an application owner, hey, show us the application, show us how you manage users in this application, what concepts are in there. Those are the things that you want to see in Elimity Insights as well. If it's about users that have permissions into components or modules or I don't know, whatever concept that the application uses, those are the things that people will recognize. That's the information that you want to see in Elimity. And then we just see, okay, where can we get that information? Is there a clean API? Then we get it from there. And in a couple of days, and that's really the amount of effort that we're talking about. It's just reading information. We have a team completely dedicated to writing those integrations. And now with AI, definitely customers can just do it themselves. So because it's just getting data, it's a much easier analysis than the two-way thing that you see in IGA. And it's really the speed for days or weeks of an integration, not more than that.
Yeah, that's you brought up the CSV. That's what I always call the lowest common denominator. Any system can now put a CSV. So you can pretty much integrate to any backend if you go all the way to that, but that's never the ideal scenario. You want something that's more real time, a web service connector, or, as you mentioned, anything that is specifically written as a out of the box connector. That makes the technology side real easy. The political side, technology can't solve that issue for you folks. So, I wanted to go back a little bit to this implementation. So the idea of, how do people typically start their deployment? But I want to think maybe intermediate term, like 6 to 12 months. And I want to know from you, like, what does success look like at that point?
Okay, cool question. I would say a customer deployment at a customer has been successful for us if after a year they say, yeah, dear Elimity, because of we using Elimity Insights, we've passed this ISO certification, or at least this part, and so the access control part of ISO, or a new CISO, or whatever reason, whatever they wanted to control, they succeeded in proving that they're in control. And if you ask about 6 to 12 months, eventually that's the value that we want to give our customers. But in most deployments, we look at value at far shorter timelines. So it's really about the top 5 systems that I said before. This should be in there in a couple of weeks. And after 1 month, typically, a partner or ourselves, we apply security controls, things like you have all the data together, then in our system you define variations of looking for orphaned accounts, or maybe who all has administrative accesses. What about separation of duty findings, data quality issues, all of that, you put that in there as quickly as possible so you can really remove critical findings also within this time span of weeks or a couple of months at the most. And then afterwards, you see these deployments growing. I would say in 2 ways. So on the one hand, you grow in the amount of systems that you integrate. You start with your top 5, you go to the top 10. You maybe sort the systems based on the amount of value compared to the amount of effort and so on. But then secondly, also you grow in the people involved in this project. Typically, the first people that really use a platform like ours is a security team or a core IAM team if the company has that. And it's people that are interested in who can now do what and then understand the complete picture of all the roles, the groups, the permissions, the entitlements, and so on. And then if you start applying these controls to that, at some point you see that these people cannot make decisions completely by themselves anymore. You have to include line managers, application owners, site owners, data owners, whatever the governance setup of an organization is in order to decide, can an account actually be removed? Can we revoke groups from a certain account and so on? And so that's how you naturally see this grow from something that is used by a selective amount of people into something that it somewhat resembles access reviews, the same recertification flow. You include these people with very specific questions, first from a cleanup perspective, and then afterwards you grow. The next phase of maturity is that these customers grow into more structural governance, I like to call it, where you define ownership, you do regular reviews, maybe of a bigger scope, not just of the findings of the security controls, but maybe all of the accounts of a team lead, maybe all of the administrative accounts and so on. So it really is growing step by step, and at every step in that way, you improve risk, you lower risk, you improve your security posture.
Yeah, I think one thing that an identity program leader needs to do is be able to talk metrics, be able to talk ROI. I think that requires some planning early in the process. Like, this is what resonates with our leadership, because I think a lot of, the benefit, the security team is going to know, like, hey, and you can usually measure that in how quickly you can fall asleep at night. Like, I am not up worrying as much anymore about, our key systems like you keep talking about. But how do we talk about this in terms of ROI and metrics to our leadership, to the people who approve the identity budget?
Yeah, in this case, some of the more internal metrics of this project is the scope of the deployment, the coverage of the critical systems, and all of that. But I think the ultimate KPI there is actually what you just mentioned. It's peace of mind. It's provable control. It's the fact that you know that an auditor will approve on this way of working. It is, if you have a full deployment of Elimity Insights, then you will be able to say, yeah, we have central visibility. We have centralized all the data from our core application into this one platform. We have our security team looking at the data. There are controls automated on top of that. They get notified if new accounts are found, if new members of critical groups are created without us knowing. All of these things are actively being monitored. We run our access reviews, our recertification campaigns. We include the necessary people, and you can even prove that you have processed all the changes that come out of this process. That in total is what I like to call the provable control, and that's the peace of mind. That's the fact that you can say, as an IAM leader or as a security leader, yes, we have things covered here. And that's when you know this piece of the, I don't know, whatever framework that we're using, we have that covered.
Do you guys have any like case studies or things like that people can go and check out? And obviously, plug the website again, right? Elimity.com/IDAC. But do you have things like that where people's like, okay, this sounds great. Let me hear from like a customer or, client story or things like that people can check out?
Definitely. You already mentioned our website, so that's also where I would point people towards. There are things like companies of several thousands of employees that really have to do a lot with a small security team, up to companies of tens of thousands of employees with IAM teams of tens or hundreds of people that want to strengthen their internal control. So all of these variations, all of the companies that we can mention are mentioned on our website.
We got pretty deep into IVIP today, and my last question for you here is, I feel like it's still being somewhat understood by the market and, real identity practitioners out there. What's one thing that you wish more IAM practitioners understood about this whole identity visibility space that we've been talking about today?
I would say actually that people just know that there's a solution for this, that a thing like IVIP exists. So really just stop thinking about Excel or Power BI or all of these things, about doing it yourself. I would say if you're an IAM manager, if you're a CISO, if you're a security practitioner, and you get to the point that you think, hey, but now who can actually do what within my organization, or which accounts actually exist, or which do we have any risks lying out there waiting to be misused? And please don't waste your time with these manual PowerShell scripts or all of the things that we have been doing for far too long. Just know that there is now a category of tools that can give you these answers with little overhead. Know that we have your back, and that there's a much more scalable and sustainable path forward than doing it manually. All of that.
I think that's such a great point to make because, I think awareness and understanding and just knowing that, hey, there is a tool for that. It's kind of like, I always point back to, I like Marvel. And so Hawkeye, whether or not he's a superhero is up for debate, but he has an arrow in his quiver for everything. So it's almost kind of like Batman has a toy for everything. Just understanding like, hey, we might not need to build this. Maybe it's the right solution, maybe it's not, but just being aware that, hey, these things exist is fantastic. Is this something, so Elimity itself, is this focused on the EU market? Is this something that's available worldwide? How do people around the world kind of, take advantage of what you guys are bringing to the market?
Right now, we started in the EU market, definitely. But we see, especially the last 2 years, traction from just all over the Western Hemisphere, I would say. So naturally, we're being pulled into the US. Also, Middle East, very strong attention there. I would say because of very similar reasons as in Europe. There's very strong regulation there from the last couple of years, specifically from Saudi Arabia, if I understand it correctly. And that really just forces people to think, then we need control. We need to show that we're in control. And then the perfect opportunity for us is that, let's say a bank, an insurance company, a financial company, highly regulated company, 5,000 people, it has to do something fast. That's where people come knocking on our door.
Very cool. You guys, I mentioned, we met at EIC last year in Berlin, and you guys are kind enough to bring, some beer for both Jim and myself. I know Jim, downed it relatively quickly, but you were sharing a story when we hit, before we hit record, kind of getting prepared for this episode. Give us the behind the scenes of sort of your Elimity branded beer and maybe next steps.
Okay. So, it's a cool story. So, we now have our Elimity beer, and it actually all started with us thinking, wouldn't it be nice if people would come over at our booth and we could share a drink, and it would just be a nice atmosphere, and people started talking to each other. You stand there a bit longer than you normally would just to meet other people and so on. And so now we have our own branded beer, which people like, which I'm happy for, because it's actually a beer chosen by our whole team. We went to a microbrewery in Belgium. We let everyone taste what they liked and then decide and vote it. So it's really something that represents Elimity. But actually before that, so you had the beer last year at EIC. The year before that, we just had that idea just before EIC, and we didn't have time to make our own beer yet. So what we did is I personally bought 20 crates of a very good Belgian beer that I'm not going to call by name right now because of what I'm going to tell you. And we put a sticker on it of Elimity, which is, I know, somewhat gray zone. But people liked it. They know the beer. We didn't hide the fact that it was that beer. Everyone could recognize it, and it's a good beer. So people really said, "Oh, we like this. It's a good way of keeping us here." And it was all fun until the guys from that brewery were at our booth. And then when we then posted a picture of the beer with our label on it on LinkedIn, the day after I got this nice and very formal email from their legal department. I think it's still the email with the most capitalized words that I've ever received. And so we formally apologized. We've never done it again. And then we went creating our own beer. That's the story behind that. Yeah.
I can understand that. I'm going to guess that some of those words rhymed with like east and east or something along those lines.
Yeah. You know the email. Yeah.
Jim, what'd you think of the beer last year? And I guess, hopefully we'll get some more samples this year. Jim, tell me about the beer last year, since you're a connoisseur of that space and I am not so much.
Well, I wouldn't call myself a connoisseur. Maybe within our podcast team of me and you, I'm more of a connoisseur than you are of beer. It was what I would say is like a classic Belgian beer. There's just a certain taste that maybe it's the hops or maybe it's the yeast that's used. I mean, the classic story, and I was talking to Maarten about this yesterday, is that Belgian beers are very locale specific. Often monasteries are where they're created, and they're created in the basements of these monasteries where they've been brewed for hundreds or even over 1,000 years. And they don't have to add the yeast to the beer. It's in the air. And there's something about a Belgian beer for me that you just know when you're drinking it. But the difference between a Belgian beer and like a German beer, a German person told me, oh yeah, the Belgians, they put fruit and flowers and stuff like that in their beer. And German beer is just like X, Y, and Z. It's, it stays more kind of in his version of it, more true to what beer should be. But me personally, I enjoy the variety of Belgian beer, like a cherry beer or something like that. I'm like, yeah, let me try that. And usually I love them.
And this one is, by the way, very close to the monastery beers that you mentioned. In terms of types of beers, in the monasteries you have the double, it's called. That's typically a very brown beer. The one that we chose for is a triple, meaning that it's a sort of way of brewing it with lots of herbs in it as well, giving it a very specific flavor, also a bit more alcohol than a typical pint of beer, but very strong flavor, and that's what we like. That's what we decided to go for, and have had very good recommendations and very good feedback on that. So happy to hear that the rest also enjoys it.
Yeah, that's the other thing I forgot to mention was that, you drink one Belgian beer, if you think it's equal to like an American Coors Light or something, no, maybe it's equal in alcohol to like 2 or 3 Coors Lights. So be careful.
So I guess the danger now is, right, we've set up this beer for success. I hope you have enough, Maarten, at your booth and you don't run out.
We continuously add more. So
there you go. Smart.
Don't worry.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. Definitely appreciate Elimity sponsoring the podcast. Your support is why we're able to go and do things like EIC. So definitely appreciate that. I want to plug the website again. Go to elimity.com/IDAC to get more information. I'll have the link in our show notes, but it's elimity.com/IDAC. Maarten, let me give you the final word before we wrap up here. What is something that you want somebody who listened to this episode, what should they take away from this conversation?
Know that if you're interested in knowing who can access what within your organization, if you have an IGA, whether you have an IGA or not, if this is something that really bothers you right now, that you're crunching on, just come talk to us, come talk to one of our competitors. I don't mind. If we can help you, open here to help you. Happy to help.
So I'm going to have a link in our show notes for everything we talked about today. We'll have a link for Maarten, you on LinkedIn, so people can reach out either with IVIP questions or maybe beer suggestions or maybe a review of the beer if you have it at EIC. Give Maarten feedback after the fact. You can find us on the web, idacpodcast.com. Connect with Jim and I. It's how we, interact with everyone that's out there. And we'll go ahead and leave it there for this week. Thanks, everyone, for watching and or listening. Thanks to Elimity for sponsoring, and we'll talk with everybody in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.